friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. I will never understand why I continue to wait until evening to film when I'm home all day. Sorry about the lighting. But here we are. Today I'm going to be doing a shelf spotlight that I've been wanting to do for a while and have had some people ask about. If you are new or not new, you may know that I love to read historical fiction, and World War II historical fiction is one of my favorite eras to read about. It is very jam-packed full, though, in the literary world. What I wanted to do today is actually talk about some books that I own from my shelves that are not World War II historical fiction. So all of these are historical fiction that I've read and loved, but don't center around World War II. I will eventually do another video where I highlight a bunch of World War II books that I've read and loved. But for today, we're going to talk about ones that are not World War II. And I'm going to try to talk about books that I haven't talked about recently or very much at all. So I'm not going to talk about South African historical fiction by Bianca Marais. Both of these are fantastic. Hum if you don't know the words and If You Want to Make God Laugh. Not talking about those. I'm not talking about Kindred by Octavia Butler, which deals with Civil War antebellum South. And I'm not going to talk about Memoirs of a Geisha, which is in Japan. This does take place somewhat during World War II, but the war is a very minor part of the book. So it's not really based on the history of World War II. It's based on Japanese culture and growing up as a geisha. But we are not talking about those ones. And I also have one cheat. But I can cheat because it's my channel. The thing is, this is a shelf spotlight, so I'm supposed to be showing you books from my shelves, but I just have one book I want to talk about that I read in 2019 that I don't feel like I've talked about enough, and it definitely fits in this category, so I just want to highlight it real quickly. That is The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle Richardson. I loved this book. I listened to it on audio. I would love to own it someday. This book takes place in 1936 in Kentucky, and we meet Cussy Mary, who is a pack horse librarian. And she travels up into the Appalachian Mountains. She lives on the mountain. She travels up even farther into the mountain to the remotest cabins and people who live up there to bring them books so that they could enjoy reading. She puts together kind of scrapbooks of recipes and stories, folklore from the people on the mountain that gets passed around and added to, which I just thought was so cool. And she's a blue person. I had never heard of blue people before. I did a Google spiral like I got sucked into the Google thread of looking up blue people. And it was really a thing. There was something biological, like in their blood, that made their skin pigment slightly bluish. So this was a fantastic read. It talks about the Works Progress Administration, talks about pack horse librarians, life in the Appalachians during the mid-1900s, and blue people. I think that's it. It's fantastic. Definitely worth picking up that one. But now we're going to go with the books that I have that are not World War II. And I'm going to start from kind of the oldest in history up till the newest, I guess. So the first one I want to talk about is Iscariot by Tosca Lee. I don't think I've ever talked about this on my channel. I think I read it before I joined BookTube. This is a biblical fiction in which it looks at the life of Judas Iscariot, who famously betrayed Jesus. I thought this was a fabulous book. I don't remember how accurate all of the aspects were, but I just chose this to represent the fact that I do love biblical fiction. While I don't read it as truth like I do with the Bible, I just think it gives an interesting perspective and helps me to realize that the people that are in the Bible were actually real people, and helps me to empathize with them a little bit more and kind of see things in a different way maybe than what I do when I'm reading the Bible, and it helps the Bible come to life in different ways. So this represents biblical fiction, but this one in particular I really did enjoy. So this is Iscariot by Tosca Lee. Then going into the 1700s, I picked up The Winter Sea. I'm highlighting The Winter Sea by Susanna Kearsley because I love Susanna Kearsley. This one is kind of set in Scotland during the Jacobite Rebellion. We follow an author who's writing about this time period, and she begins to have memories of one of her characters who lives in Scotland back in that time period. So we kind of go back and forth between modern day and this 1700s, early 1700s. And it's just a kind of fun story, fun way to look at history through these memories. So yeah, I thought this one was kind of a fun one. Then going into, let's see, the 18th century as well, so also the 1700s, starting there and moving generations and generations forward into closer to present day. This is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. This one starts out in Ghana in the early 18th century. We follow the lives of two half-sisters who never really know each other, but they are related through their father. One of them is captured and becomes a slave and is brought on a boat to America, and we follow her family from generation to generation. And then alternating chapters, we follow the other sister who stays in Ghana and actually marries one of the slave traders, and what her life is like living in Ghana. We follow some of the same themes as some of the same things that happen to these people, but it's to these family members, but it's also just an interesting look at African American history and the history of slavery here in America through the Civil Rights Movement and into the 1960s. I don't know what the year of when it ends, but I found this to be super interesting, and each chapter, each character was so compelling, but it was a really good historical look at Black history in America in like a snapshot view. I'm sure there are books that get deeper into it, but I thought that this one was super interesting, as well as comparing and contrasting that with life in Africa, in Ghana in particular, throughout this time period. Fantastic read. So good. I think I read this one of my first years on BookTube. So 2 or 3 years ago I read this one. It's so good. So good. The next pair I'm going to talk about is The Kitchen House and Glory Over Everything. These are by Kathleen Grissom. I really want to highlight The Kitchen House, but it does have a sequel, Glory Over Everything, which I also really enjoyed. These ones take place in the early 19th century, turn of the century. And we do follow a young Irish girl who's traveling on a boat to America from Ireland. Both of her parents die on the boat, and a plantation owner from the South kind of adopts her as an indentured servant almost. She lives in the kitchen house with some of the slaves, and the slave families become her family. She grows up in this setting, but is kind of torn between being a young white girl, but also feeling most of her connections with these slave families that she is spending all of her time with. So good. Heartbreaking, very difficult to read at times, but really, really good. And then this one, we follow a couple of the characters from the first book in this one, and I can't even tell you which characters because that would be spoilery for the first one. But yes, both of those are very good. Pre-Civil War South. Excellent, excellent books. We have Orphan Train by Christina Baker Klein. And I read this also before BookTube days, so I don't know that I've ever talked about it on my channel. This one takes place in the Depression era in America, and we follow a young girl, Vivian, who is an immigrant from Ireland and an orphan. And she is sent on these orphan trains that would travel to the Midwest, would travel towards the West, and stop at different towns. And all the orphans would kind of get out, and different people would come and choose which one they wanted to come home and live with them. Often they were just chosen to become workers, like kind of free slaves in a way, like housemaids and farm hands. And so we follow the story of Vivian as this is her childhood experience. This one also has a dual timeline, so we're also in Maine in a more present day. We follow a young girl named Molly, teenager named Molly, who is at the brink of being sent to juvenile detention, and she is sent to this woman, Vivian's home, to help her do some chores, cleaning out the attic and things, and learns of Vivian's story that way. So I remember really liking this book. I remember crying, of course. I think most of these books made me cry. But yeah, this is another one that I really did enjoy. I should reread that someday. Then we enter The Titanic, and this is called The Girl Who Came Home by Hazel Gaynor. This is my first Hazel Gaynor that I read. This was recommended to me back in 2017 when I did a project where I asked 12 different booktubers to recommend books to me. And Maria from Read, Create, Repeat homeschool. I don't know if her channel name has changed. She recommended this one to me, and I'm so thankful because I've read a couple other Hazel Gaynor books now and really like them. This one takes place on the Titanic, but we also have a dual timeline in the 1980s, and I love those dual timelines. Well, it's a very popular trope for historical fiction books as a way to tell the story with either flashbacks or kind of alternating between the two timelines. But in this one we follow, what's her name? Maggie Murphy, who, along with a handful of other people from her neighborhood or her village in Ireland, travel on the Titanic in hopes for a better life in America. They are not among the elite up above, like on the upper levels of the ship. They are like the workers, and they stay down on the lower levels. Maggie does survive. She's one of the few who survives, and that's kind of in the title, so that's not a spoiler. But we kind of learn about that experience for her. She had left behind a sweetheart in Ireland, and that affects her moving forward. And then she kind of goes mute about, not totally mute, but she does not talk about her experience at all when she arrives in America. So super interesting. Absolutely loved this book. And yeah, need to read more from Hazel Gaynor. She has quite a few that are not World War II historical fiction. So I want to read more from her. Last year I did read I Was Anastasia by Ariel Lawhon, and this one is Russian historical fiction, and it follows the Romanov family to a degree. We follow two women, actually, Anna and Anastasia. The structure of this is a little different in that in one of the women's storylines it goes backwards from a certain point, and the other one moves forward in time. So it took me a little bit to get used to that structure, but once I did, I really enjoyed this book. I am not one who knows much about that part of history, so I had a lot of hopes that a certain outcome was going to happen in this, and I kind of was leaning towards that way of thinking, but I didn't know the story, so I didn't know that couldn't be possible. So it was interesting to learn about it in this format. It was very cool. And I did do a little bit more research afterwards to just kind of educate myself. The last book I want to talk about from my shelves today is one that has been on my mind a lot lately because of another book I was just reading, but I want to talk about Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. I loved this book. In this book we follow a family of 4 or 5 children who live on a shanty boat in the Mississippi River outside of Memphis, Tennessee. They are left on the boat one day when the dad takes the mom to the hospital for some reason, and they are kidnapped. And we follow their experience in dealing with the Tennessee Children's Home Society and Georgia Tann, who ran that. And I did not realize while reading this book that the TCHS, that the Tennessee Children's Home and Georgia Tann were real. Somehow I didn't know that this was based on true events. So after reading this book and looking through the author's note and things at the back, and I immediately got onto Google again and had to look this up. It was horrifying. Georgia Tann was a horrible woman who kidnapped children in order to place them with adoptive families and make money off of it. She took babies straight out of hospitals. She kidnapped kids right out of their yards. She coerced young mothers who weren't sure about keeping their kids. All of these, she just did horrible events. And then where the kids actually lived was horrible. Many children died that were in her care. They just were not cared for. Only the prettiest and the healthiest were placed out in homes. So if you were not one of those things, you did not have a strong chance of survival. There's also a modern day storyline in here that I didn't care for as much. Once they came together, as they typically do, or once I understood the connection, I liked it a little better, but I really loved the past storyline, the historical storyline in this one. I did just read a nonfiction based on the Tennessee Children's Home Society and children who survived and were adopted from there. So I will talk about that in my January wrap up, but this one is fantastic. It's so good. So here are the 9 plus Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek. Here are the books I want to highlight today. Non-World War II historical fiction. I would love to chat with you in the comments below about any of these books. Do you have any other non-World War II favorites? I could have gone through my shelves and picked out 10, 20 more, loads more that I haven't yet read, but I did want to highlight ones that I have already read today so that I could recommend some to you. But I would love to hear any recommendations that you have in the comments for non-World War II historical fiction that you love, that you think I might love. I might already own it. It's possible. But I also would love to chat about these books or anything else that you want to talk about down in the comments below. Give this video a big thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that little bell so you get notified when I post new videos. And I will be talking to you in another video very soon. Bye.